The moment Caleb Turner lifted the hem of his mail-order bride's torn sleeve to bandage a scratch, he saw them, dark purple bruises covering her arms like a map of violence. His jaw tightened. Evelyn flinched, shame flooding her face as she tried to pull away, but Caleb didn't let go. Instead, his voice dropped to something dangerous and gentle all at once. "Who hurt you?" 3 words that would change everything. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The Colorado sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Redemption Creek as the afternoon stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Mackenzie's General Store. It was late August of 1876, and the frontier town, barely more than a collection of weathered buildings and desperate dreams, stirred with the lazy curiosity that accompanied any arrival from the outside world. Evelyn Moore sat rigid on the wooden bench inside the coach, her gloved hands gripping her single worn valise so tightly her knuckles had gone white beneath the fabric. Through the small window, she could see faces gathering, men mostly, their eyes sharp with the kind of interest that made her stomach turn. She'd seen that look before, that hungry, assessing gaze that measured a woman's worth in curves and compliance. Her ribs ached with every shallow breath. The corset she wore wasn't just for fashion. It held her together, literally, binding the bruises that had finally stopped bleeding 3 days ago. Beneath her plain gray traveling dress, her body was a canvas of violence. Purple and yellow marks on her arms, a handprint-shaped bruise on her left thigh, and scratches along her collarbone that she'd carefully hidden with a high-necked collar. The coach driver, a grizzled man named Pete, who'd been kind enough not to ask questions when she'd winced climbing aboard in Denver, opened the door. "Redemption Creek, ma'am. End of the line." Evelyn forced herself to move, though every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden in the relative safety of the coach's shadows. She accepted Pete's weathered hand and stepped down, her button-up boots meeting the packed earth with a soft thud. The August heat wrapped around her immediately, making her already uncomfortable dress feel suffocating. "You the mail-order bride?" a rough voice called out. A stocky man with tobacco-stained teeth pushed forward from the small crowd. "Because Turner's expecting someone, but you look a mite scrawny for ranch work." Laughter rippled through the gathering, and Evelyn felt her face flush. She'd spent the entire 3-day journey from Pennsylvania to Colorado rehearsing what she'd say when she arrived, how she'd present herself with dignity despite her circumstances. But now, faced with crude speculation and wandering eyes, all those careful words evaporated. "I'm looking for Mr. Caleb Turner," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "We've been corresponding about an arrangement." "Oh, an arrangement," another man elbowed his companion. "That's a fancy word for it, ain't it?" Evelyn's cheeks burned hotter, but she kept her chin up. She'd survived far worse than crude jokes from strangers. The bruises hidden beneath her dress were testament to that. "That's enough, Macready." The new voice cut through the laughter like a knife through butter. Quiet, but with an edge of steel that made the crude comment stop immediately. The small crowd parted, and Evelyn got her first look at Caleb Turner. He wasn't what she'd expected. The letters they'd exchanged over the past 4 months had been practical, almost businesslike. He'd needed a wife to help run his ranch and provide companionship in the isolated frontier. She'd needed escape from a situation that had become untenable, though she'd been careful never to explain exactly why a respectable 24-year-old woman from Philadelphia would be desperate enough to marry a stranger 2,000 miles away. In her imagination, shaped by dime novels and desperation, she'd pictured someone harsh, demanding, perhaps older, weathered by the frontier into something as hard and unforgiving as the landscape itself. Instead, Caleb Turner looked to be in his early 30s, tall and lean, with the kind of strength that came from hard work rather than brutality. His dark hair was neatly trimmed beneath a worn Stetson, and his eyes, a striking gray blue that reminded her of winter sky, assessed her with something that looked almost like concern. "Miss Moore?" He stepped forward, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed almost foreign after months of being treated like property. "I'm Caleb Turner. Welcome to Redemption Creek." He didn't grab for her hand or try to embrace her. He simply stood at a respectful distance, hat in hand, waiting for her response. The simple courtesy of it made something tight in Evelyn's chest loosen just slightly. "Mr. Turner?" She managed a small nod, acutely aware of the watching crowd. "Thank you for the opportunity." Something flickered in his eyes. Was it disappointment? She couldn't tell. Perhaps he'd been expecting someone prettier, healthier looking, someone who didn't have dark circles under her eyes from weeks of poor sleep and constant fear. "Let me get your trunk," Caleb said, turning toward the coach. "There isn't one." The admission came out smaller than she'd intended. "Just the valise." He paused, and she saw understanding dawn in his expression. A woman traveling 2,000 miles to start a new life, and she had nothing but a single bag. It told a story all its own. "Then let me take that for you." He reached for the valise, and Evelyn instinctively jerked backward. The movement was slight but unmistakable. A flinch. The automatic response of someone who'd learned that reaching hands often brought pain. Caleb froze. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, Evelyn was certain he saw right through her careful facade to the truth she was desperately trying to hide. But he didn't press. He simply lowered his hand and took a small step back. "My wagon's just down the street," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Moore." The gentleness in his tone nearly undid her. Evelyn blinked rapidly, forcing back the tears that threatened. She couldn't afford to break down. Not here, not now, not in front of all these strangers who were still watching with varying degrees of curiosity and speculation. "I'm ready," she said, though it was a lie. She'd never be truly ready for what came next, whatever that might be. Caleb gestured toward a sturdy wagon hitched to two patient-looking horses. As they walked, Evelyn was aware of the whispers following them. She caught fragments. "Looks half-starved. Wonder what her story is. Turner's getting more than he bargained for, that's certain." The wagon seat was higher than she'd anticipated. Caleb offered his hand to help her up, and this time Evelyn forced herself not to flinch. His grip was firm but gentle, and he released her the moment she was seated. He stored her valise in the back, then climbed up beside her. The proximity made her tense. They were close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something clean like soap. After months of living in cramped quarters with her Uncle Marcus and his alcohol-soaked breath, even this innocent nearness felt threatening. "The ranch is about an hour's ride," Caleb said as he gathered the reins. "We can stop along the way if you need to rest." "I'm fine." Another lie, but what else could she say? That her entire body ached? That she hadn't had a full night's sleep in 3 months? That every male voice, every sudden movement made her heart race with fear? They rode in silence through the town. Redemption Creek was smaller than Evelyn had imagined. A single main street with a handful of businesses. The general store, a blacksmith, what looked like a saloon, and a small building with a sign reading, "Dr. Samuel Chen, physician." As they passed the doctor's office, Caleb spoke again. "Doc Chen is good people. Came out here from San Francisco about 5 years back. His wife Sarah runs the schoolhouse when there's enough children to teach." Evelyn nodded, filing away the information. A doctor. That might be useful if her ribs didn't heal properly, though the thought of explaining her injuries to a stranger made her stomach churn. They left the town behind, and the landscape opened up into rolling grassland dotted with scrub brush and the occasional cluster of cottonwood trees. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. "It's beautiful," Evelyn said softly, and she meant it. The openness of the land was so different from the cramped streets of Philadelphia, from the dark corners of her uncle's house where she'd learned to make herself invisible. "It can be harsh," Caleb replied. "Winters are brutal, and we're isolated out here. The nearest real town is 2 days' ride, but there's a freedom to it, a chance to build something clean." Something clean. The words resonated in Evelyn's battered soul. That's what she wanted, needed, a chance to wash away the filth of what she'd endured, to build a life that didn't involve cowering in corners or calculating which bruises would show. "Mr. Turner," she began, then hesitated. There was so much she needed to say, so much she should have told him in her letters, but hadn't dared. How could she explain in writing what her uncle had done? How could she make a stranger understand why a supposedly respectable woman would flee her only family and agree to marry someone she'd never met? "Caleb," he corrected gently. "We're to be married, Miss Moore." Might as well start with first names. Caleb, then. And I'm Evelyn. She took a breath, trying to find the right words. I need you to understand that I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'll work hard. I can cook and clean and mend. I won't be a burden. That's not what I'm worried about. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, but there was something in his voice, a careful quality that suggested he was choosing his words as precisely as she was. The letters we exchanged were clear about the practical aspects of this arrangement. What I need to know is simpler than all that. Evelyn's heart hammered. This was it. He was going to ask about her past, demand explanation she wasn't ready to give. Are you here of your own free will? Caleb asked. The question caught her off guard. Yes, I am. And do you understand that marriage is a choice that continues past the wedding day? He glanced at her then, those gray-blue eyes serious. I put an advertisement in the paper because I need help on the ranch, and because a man gets lonely out here. But I won't have a wife who stays out of obligation or fear. I need to know you're choosing this, choosing to try, at least. Tears pricked at Evelyn's eyes again. When was the last time anyone had asked what she wanted, what she chose? I'm choosing this, she whispered. I'm choosing a chance at something different. Caleb nodded slowly. Different, I can promise you. The question is whether different will be better. They rode in silence for a while longer. The sun was starting its descent toward the mountains, painting the grassland in shades of gold and amber. Despite her fear and pain and uncertainty, Evelyn found herself relaxing fractionally. There was something steady about the man beside her, something that suggested he meant what he said. I should tell you about the arrangements, Caleb said as they crested a small hill. I've spoken with Samuel and Sarah Chen, the doctor and school teacher I mentioned. They've agreed to let you stay with them until the wedding. Evelyn's head whipped toward him in surprise. Stay with them? But I thought you might want a few days to settle in before we make things official, Caleb said. The parson comes through town once a month. He'll be back in 3 days. That gives you time to rest from your journey, meet some of the people in town, and be certain this is what you want. But I came all this way, Evelyn protested, even as relief flooded through her. Surely you don't want to delay. 3 days won't make a difference to me, Caleb interrupted, but it might make a difference to you. Besides, he added, a hint of dry humor entering his voice, it'll give the town gossips something to chew on. They'll be disappointed there's no scandal. Despite everything, Evelyn felt a smile tug at her lips. You don't mind what people will say? I learned a long time ago that people will talk no matter what you do, Caleb replied. Might as well give them something wholesome to discuss instead of inventing drama. As they rounded a bend, a small cabin came into view, nestled against a grove of cottonwoods. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Evelyn could see a woman hanging washing on a line in the yard. That's the Chen place, Caleb said. Sarah's expecting you. He pulled the wagon to a stop, and a petite Chinese woman in a practical calico dress looked up from her washing. Her face broke into a warm smile as she set down her basket and approached. You must be Evelyn, she said, her English accented but clear. I'm Sarah Chen. Welcome to Redemption Creek. Evelyn climbed down from the wagon, with Caleb's help, though she managed not to flinch this time, and found herself facing a woman perhaps a few years older than herself, with kind eyes and an open expression. Thank you for taking me in, Evelyn said. I hope it's not too much trouble. Nonsense, Sarah replied. It gets lonely out here with just Samuel and me. I'm happy for the company. She glanced at Caleb with a knowing look. And I appreciate a man with enough sense to give a woman time to catch her breath before plunging into marriage. Caleb had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. He retrieved Evelyn's valise from the wagon and handed it to her carefully, making sure their hands didn't touch. I'll come by tomorrow if that's all right, he said to Evelyn. Show you the ranch, introduce you to the hands, let you see what you're getting into. I'd like that, Evelyn replied, and she meant it. Despite her fear, despite the pain that lanced through her ribs with every deep breath, she found herself curious about this quiet man who'd just given her something precious, choice. As Caleb drove away, Sarah linked her arm through Evelyn's, gently, carefully, as if she somehow sensed the hidden injuries. Come inside, she said. You look exhausted. There's fresh water for washing, and I've made stew. After you've eaten and rested, we can talk. Or not talk if you'd prefer. Whatever you need. The kindness nearly broke Evelyn. She'd been holding herself together through sheer will for so long that simple gentleness felt like a physical force, cracking through her carefully constructed walls. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with unshed tears. Sarah squeezed her arm gently. "You're safe here, Evelyn. I don't know what you've been through, and I won't pry. But I want you to know you're safe here." That night, after a meal of Sarah's excellent stew and the luxury of washing with clean water and privacy, Evelyn lay in a small but comfortable bed in the Chen's spare room. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the sky like scattered diamonds, brighter than any stars she'd seen in Philadelphia. Her body ached, the bruises on her ribs protesting the comfortable mattress after weeks of sleeping on hard floors where her uncle's drunken kicks were less likely to find her. But it was a different kind of pain now, not fresh violence, but the slow ache of healing. She thought about Caleb Turner, about his careful distance, his respectful questions, his decision to give her time and space. In her experience, men took what they wanted. They demanded and grabbed and hurt. But Caleb had done none of those things. He'd seen her flinch, had noticed her fear, and instead of being angered by it, he'd given her exactly what she needed: safety. Was it possible, Evelyn wondered, as sleep finally began to claim her, that she'd actually found a man who kept his word? Could this strange arrangement, this marriage of convenience to a cowboy in the middle of nowhere, actually be the escape she so desperately needed? Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She'd have to face the ranch, meet more strangers, navigate the complicated waters of a community that would judge her for being a mail-order bride. But tonight, for the first time in months, Evelyn Moore allowed herself something she'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The bruises beneath her dress would fade eventually. The question was whether the scars on her soul would heal as well, and whether Caleb Turner, this quiet, steady man who asked permission instead of taking, might be the kind of person who could help her find out. Outside, a coyote called in the distance, and somewhere in the darkness, Evelyn heard the answering howl. Wild and free and utterly untamed. She closed her eyes and dreamed of wide-open spaces where the past couldn't follow, and of gray-blue eyes that promised safety instead of pain. The first day of her new life had ended. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. Morning came too quickly. Evelyn woke to unfamiliar sounds, birds she couldn't name, the distant lowing of cattle, and voices murmuring in the next room. For a disoriented moment, panic seized her. Where was she? Then memory flooded back. Colorado, Redemption Creek, Caleb Turner, safety, or at least the promise of it. She sat up carefully, testing her ribs. The pain had dulled to a persistent ache rather than the sharp agony of the first few days after her uncle's last beating. The bruises were yellowing at the edges now, which the doctor in Denver had said meant they were healing. Not fast enough to hide them completely, but enough that she could move without wincing with every breath. Sarah had left a basin of water and fresh towels on the washstand. Beside them lay a simple dress in a soft blue calico, clearly meant for Evelyn. The gesture brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't owned anything new in over a year, not since her uncle had taken control of her father's modest estate and decided that his orphaned niece didn't need frivolous things like proper clothing. She washed quickly, cataloging her injuries as she did. The fingerprint bruises on her upper arms had faded from purple to a sickly green-yellow. The handprint on her thigh was still tender but no longer made her gasp when touched. The scratches on her collarbone were healing cleanly, thank heavens. She'd been terrified they might fester during the long journey west. The blue dress fit reasonably well, though it was slightly loose through the shoulders. Sarah was smaller boned than Evelyn, but the difference wasn't dramatic. As she fastened the buttons, Evelyn caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked like a ghost. Her face was too thin, her cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her blonde hair, once her one vanity, hung limp and dull. No wonder the men in town yesterday had looked at her with skepticism. She looked like someone barely surviving, not someone capable of helping run a ranch. "You're awake," Sarah's voice came from the doorway, accompanied by a gentle knock on the doorframe. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months," Evelyn admitted, turning from the mirror. "Thank you for the dress. You didn't have to—" Nonsense, Sarah interrupted with the same warmth she'd shown the previous evening. I have more dresses than occasions to wear them. Besides, she added with a smile, that color suits you much better than it ever did me. Brings out your eyes. Evelyn touched the soft fabric self-consciously. It's beautiful. Come have breakfast, Sarah said. Samuel's already left to check on old Mrs. Patterson. Her rheumatism's been troubling her, but he'll be back soon. Caleb said he'd come by around mid-morning to take you to see the ranch. The mention of Caleb made Evelyn's stomach flutter with nervousness. In the light of day, yesterday's kindness seemed almost too good to be true. What if he'd reconsidered? What if he'd taken one look at her gaunt face and realized he'd made a terrible mistake? Sarah seemed to read her thoughts. He'll come, she said quietly. Caleb Turner is many things, but unreliable isn't one of them. If he says he'll do something, he does it. They ate breakfast at a small wooden table near the window, fresh bread with butter and jam, eggs from Sarah's chickens, and coffee that tasted like heaven after weeks of weak tea and stale water. Evelyn tried not to eat too quickly, but she was hungrier than she'd realized. When did you and Samuel come to Redemption Creek? Evelyn asked, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly to fill the silence with something other than her anxious thoughts. Sarah's face softened with memory. 5 years ago this October. Samuel had been working at a hospital in San Francisco, but the prejudice there was... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Difficult. Patients who would rather die than be treated by a Chinese doctor. Colleagues who questioned his every decision. We heard there was a need for doctors on the frontier, and Samuel thought perhaps people desperate for medical care might be less concerned about the color of his skin. And were they? Evelyn asked. Some were, some weren't. Sarah shrugged philosophically. But enough trusted him that we've made a life here. And Caleb Turner stood up for Samuel in those early days when others might have driven us out. Threatened to stop doing business with anyone who refused Samuel's care. It made a difference. Evelyn absorbed this information, adding it to her growing understanding of the man she'd agreed to marry. A man who stood up for others. A man who kept his word. It seemed almost too good to be true, and yet Sarah spoke of him with the certainty of someone who knew him well. How do you know Caleb? Evelyn asked. Samuel treated him after a bad fall from a horse about 4 years back. Broke 3 ribs and dislocated his shoulder. He was a terrible patient, kept trying to work before he'd healed properly, but he paid Samuel's fee without question and sent other folks our way. Sarah poured more coffee into Evelyn's cup. He's a good man, Evelyn. A bit stubborn, keeps too much to himself, works too hard, but good, through and through. The words should have been reassuring, but they only made Evelyn more nervous. What would a good man want with someone as damaged as her? When he discovered the full extent of what she'd endured, would he still want to go through with the marriage? A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Sarah rose to answer it, and Evelyn heard Caleb's deep voice exchanging pleasantries. Her heart hammered against her bruised ribs as his footsteps approached. He appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, looking much as he had yesterday, clean, respectful, and somehow both solid and gentle at the same time. His eyes found hers immediately. Morning, Evelyn. I hope you rested well. I did, thank you. She stood, smoothing down the borrowed dress nervously. I'm ready to see the ranch whenever you are. Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or relief. The wagon's outside. I thought we'd take the morning to show you around, then have lunch at the ranch. My foreman's wife, Maria, is eager to meet you. The ride to the Turner Ranch took them east from the Chen place, following a well-worn trail that cut through grassland dotted with grazing cattle. Evelyn found herself relaxing slightly in the familiar rhythm of the wagon, though she was acutely aware of Caleb's presence beside her. How many head do you run? She asked, trying to sound knowledgeable, even though her understanding of ranching was limited to what she'd gleaned from books. About 800 right now, Caleb replied. We're small compared to some of the operations further south, but it's manageable with the crew I've got. 4 hands year-round, plus a few extra during roundup and branding season. That's a lot of cattle to manage. It keeps us busy, he agreed. The ranch has been in my family for 12 years now. My father started it, built the main house and the original barn. When he and my mother passed from fever 6 years ago, I inherited it all. Evelyn heard the grief in his voice, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "They would have liked you, I think. My mother especially. She always said this place needed a woman's touch, someone to make it a home instead of just a work camp." The words sent a jolt of anxiety through Evelyn. "I'll do my best," she said softly. "Though I should be honest, I don't know much about ranching. I grew up in Philadelphia. My father was a clerk, and after he died, I lived with my uncle. I can cook and clean and manage a household, but cattle and horses and all of this," she gestured at the vast landscape around them. "It's all new to me." "Then you'll learn," Caleb said simply. "I don't expect you to know everything right away. Hell, I'm still learning, and I've been doing this my whole life. The land teaches you if you're willing to listen." They crested a rise, and the ranch spread out before them. The main house was larger than Evelyn had expected, a two-story structure built from local timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and one side. A barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings. Corrals held horses, and in the distance she could see more cattle grazing. "It's bigger than I imagined," Evelyn admitted. "The house has 4 bedrooms," Caleb said, and she heard a note of carefully maintained neutrality in his voice. "More than enough space for privacy, if that's what you need." The implication hung in the air between them. He was telling her, without directly stating it, that their marriage didn't have to include physical intimacy, that she could have her own space, her own sanctuary. The relief that flooded through her was so intense it nearly made her dizzy. "I appreciate that," she managed, "more than you know." He glanced at her then, really looked at her, and Evelyn saw understanding in those gray-blue eyes. He didn't know the details, couldn't know what she'd endured, but he sensed enough to know she needed gentleness. Time. Space. "Come on," he said, his voice deliberately lighter. "Let me introduce you to the operation." The next hour passed in a blur of new faces and information. Miguel Santos, the foreman, was a weathered Mexican man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. His wife Maria, a round, warm woman who immediately pulled Evelyn into a gentle embrace, managed the ranch house cooking and helped with the garden. "Finally, another woman around here," Maria declared in accented English, beaming at Evelyn. "These men, they live like animals without someone to civilize them. You and I, we will change that, yes?" The ranch hands were introduced one by one. Young Tommy, barely 18 and eager to prove himself. Jack Morrison, a quiet man in his 30s who'd lost an arm in the war but could still rope and ride better than most. And Chen Wei, Sarah's younger brother, who'd come west with his sister and brother-in-law and found work at the Turner Ranch. Each man was respectful, tipping hats and offering polite greetings. But Evelyn saw curiosity in their eyes, speculation about what kind of woman their boss had ordered through the mail. Caleb showed her the house last, after the others had returned to their work. The interior was neat but clearly masculine, practical furniture, minimal decoration, everything designed for function rather than comfort or beauty. "Like I said, it needs a woman's touch," Caleb said, almost apologetically. "Maria does her best, but she's got her own household to manage. I'm not here to dictate how you arrange things. If you want to change furniture or add curtains or whatever women do to make a place feel like home, you're free to do it." Evelyn walked through the room slowly, taking it all in. The kitchen was well equipped with a good stove and ample storage. The parlor had a fireplace and sturdy chairs arranged with no thought to aesthetics. Upstairs, the bedrooms were simple. Beds, dressers, washstands, nothing more. "Which room is yours?" she asked quietly. Caleb pointed to the largest bedroom at the end of the hall. "That one. You can take any of the others, whichever makes you most comfortable." She chose the room at the opposite end of the hall, as far from his as possible. If he noticed, he didn't comment on it. Back downstairs, Maria had laid out lunch in the kitchen. Fresh bread, cheese, cold beef, and early tomatoes from the garden. They ate mostly in silence, though Maria chattered cheerfully about the garden, the chickens she wanted to expand, and how wonderful it would be to have another woman to talk to. After lunch, Caleb suggested a walk to see the rest of the property. They followed a path that led away from the main buildings, toward a creek lined with cottonwood trees. The afternoon was hot, but shade from the trees provided relief. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Caleb admitted as they reached the creek bank. Clear water burbled over smooth stones, and dragonflies danced in the dappled sunlight. When things get overwhelming, I come here to think. Evelyn could understand why. There was peace here, a sense of timelessness that made the troubles of the human world seem small and distant. "Caleb," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." He turned to look at her, his expression open and patient. "All right." She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times during the journey west, planned exactly what she'd say and how she'd say it. But now, faced with actually speaking the words, her carefully prepared speech evaporated. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," she began, then stopped, her throat tight with fear and shame. "About what?" His voice was gentle, non-judgmental. "About why I answered your advertisement. Why I was so desperate to leave Philadelphia." She wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture she couldn't suppress. "You deserve to know what you're getting into before we go through with this marriage." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words surprised her. "Evelyn, I figure everyone's got reasons for the choices they make. Whatever sent you west, it's your story to tell or not tell, as you see fit. I won't force it out of you. But you should know," she started. "Should I?" he interrupted gently. "Or do you think I should know because you've been told your whole life that you owe men explanations for your existence?" The question hit her like a physical blow, because he was right. She'd been conditioned to believe that her value lay in her utility to men, that she owed them her story, her body, her complete submission. She faltered. "I don't want you to think you're getting something other than what you expected." "What I expected," Caleb said slowly, "was a woman willing to take a chance on a frontier ranch, and a man she'd never met. What I hoped for was someone I could build a partnership with, someone who'd treat this place, and me, with respect. Everything else, your past, your secrets, your scars, whatever they might be, that's yours to share when and if you're ready." Evelyn felt tears gathering in her eyes. "You're very kind." "I'm practical," he corrected. "Whatever happened to you back east, it's done. This is a new start for both of us. The question isn't what you were running from. It's what you're running toward." She let his words settle over her like a blanket. What was she running toward? She'd been so focused on escape that she hadn't really considered what came after. A home. Safety. Maybe, eventually, something resembling peace. "I want to try," she said finally, "to make this work. To be a good wife to you, to help with the ranch. I want to prove that I'm not just running away from something, I'm running towards something better." "Then that's enough for now," Caleb replied. He held out his hand, not grabbing or demanding, just offering. "Partners?" Evelyn looked at his hand for a long moment. It was large and calloused from work, with a thin scar across the knuckles that spoke of old injury. It was the hand of a man who worked hard, who built things instead of destroying them. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and firm but not crushing. He held her hand for just a moment, then released it, respecting the boundaries she hadn't needed to voice. "Partners," she agreed. They walked back to the ranch house in companionable silence. Evelyn's mind was racing, trying to reconcile this gentle, patient man with everything she'd learned about men from her uncle. Marcus had been cruel and violent, using his fists to enforce his will and his words to tear down any shred of self-worth she'd managed to maintain. He'd taught her that men were unpredictable, dangerous, that their kindness was always a trap. But Caleb Turner didn't fit that pattern. His kindness seemed genuine, his respect real. It terrified her almost as much as violence had, because she didn't know how to navigate it. As they reached the main house, Miguel approached with a question about moving some cattle to fresh pasture. Caleb excused himself to handle the ranch business, leaving Evelyn with Maria. The older woman linked her arm through Evelyn's with comfortable familiarity. "Come, I show you the garden. You like to cook?" "I do," Evelyn admitted. "Or I did when I had the opportunity." "Good, good." Maria beamed. "Then we will cook together. I teach you what grows here, what works in this climate. Back in Mexico, my mother had a beautiful garden. Here, it is harder. The soil is different. The weather more severe. But we make it work, yes?" They spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden, with Maria pointing out various vegetables and herbs, explaining which ones thrived and which ones struggled in Colorado's unpredictable climate. It was peaceful work, and Evelyn found herself genuinely enjoying the older woman's company. "You're nervous about the wedding," Maria observed as they pulled weeds from around the tomato plants. It wasn't a question. Evelyn's hand stilled. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to another woman." Maria sat back on her heels, wiping dirt from her hands. "I was terrified when I married Miguel. I was 16. He was 25. I barely knew him. My father arranged it, said Miguel was a good man who would provide for me." She smiled at the memory. "I cried for a week before the wedding, certain my life was over." "But it worked out?" Evelyn asked softly. "It worked out because Miguel was patient, because he understood that trust must be earned, not demanded, and because he kept his word." Maria looked at Evelyn with knowing eyes. "Mr. Caleb, he is like that, a man who keeps his word." "I hope you're right," Evelyn whispered. "I am right." Maria said it with such certainty that Evelyn almost believed her. "That man, he waits 5 years to find a wife. 5 years! You know why? Because he will not settle for just anyone. He wants a true partner, not a servant or a, how do you say, a decoration." "Then why me?" The question burst out before Evelyn could stop it. "I have nothing to offer him. No dowry, no skills specific to ranch life, nothing but—" She cut herself off before she could say damage. Maria's expression softened. "You have you to offer. That is enough for him, or he would not have sent for you." As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Caleb appeared to take Evelyn back to the Chen place. The ride back was quieter than the morning journey had been. Evelyn was exhausted, not from physical labor, but from the emotional weight of the day, the constant effort to appear normal and capable when inside she was still so fractured. "Thank you for today," she said as they neared the Chen cabin. "For showing me the ranch, for introducing me to everyone, for being so patient." "You don't need to thank me for basic decency, Evelyn." There was something almost sad in his voice. "That should be the bare minimum expectation, not something worthy of gratitude." She didn't know how to respond to that. In her experience, basic decency from men was rare enough to deserve thanks. When they reached the cabin, Caleb helped her down from the wagon with the same careful respect he'd shown all day. As she started toward the door, his voice stopped her. "Evelyn?" She turned back. "Yes?" "The wedding is in 2 days. If you need more time, if you want to postpone or reconsider, I need you to tell me. I won't hold you to this if you're not ready." The offer was genuine. She could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. He would let her go if she asked. The realization was staggering. "I'll be ready," she said, more to convince herself than him. 2 days is fine." He nodded slowly. "All right then, I'll see you tomorrow. Sleep well, Evelyn." As she watched him drive away, Evelyn felt the weight of her decision settling over her like a physical thing. In 2 days, she would marry a man she barely knew. In 2 days, her life would change irrevocably once again. The question was whether this change would finally be for the better or whether she was simply trading one form of captivity for another. Only time would tell. Inside, Sarah had dinner waiting and a warm bath drawn. As Evelyn sank into the hot water, letting it soothe her aching muscles and healing bruises, she allowed herself to cry. Not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming confusion of finding kindness where she'd expected cruelty, and the terrifying responsibility of deciding whether to trust it. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with sunlight streaming through the window of Evelyn's borrowed room like an unwelcome herald. She'd barely slept, tossing restlessly as her mind churned through every possible outcome of the day ahead. Now, sitting on the edge of the bed in her nightgown, she pressed a hand to her ribs and tried to breathe through the anxiety that squeezed her chest tighter than any corset. Sarah knocked softly before entering with a breakfast tray. "I thought you might want to eat in here this morning," she said gently, setting the tray on the small table. "Give yourself some quiet before the day begins." Evelyn managed a weak smile. "Thank you. I'm not sure I can eat anything." "Try," Sarah encouraged. "You'll need your strength." She settled into the chair beside the table, her expression thoughtful. "Are you having second thoughts?" "Third and fourth thoughts," Evelyn admitted. "And fifth ones, too." That's natural. Sarah poured tea from a delicate pot, the familiar ritual somehow soothing. Marriage is a leap of faith even when you've known someone your whole life. But Evelyn, I want you to know something. If you truly don't want to go through with this, Samuel and I will help you. We can find you work in town, help you establish yourself independently. You have choices. The words were meant to comfort, but they only intensified Evelyn's conflict. She did have choices now, more than she'd had in years. But what was the right choice? Return to a precarious independence with no real prospects, or marry a man who seemed kind but whom she barely knew? I made a commitment, Evelyn said finally. Caleb has been nothing but respectful. It wouldn't be fair to back out now. Sarah's eyes were knowing. Marriage should be more than just fair, Evelyn. It should be something you want, not just something you're resigned to. Before Evelyn could respond, they heard the sound of hoofbeats outside. Through the window, she saw Miguel's wagon pulling up, with Maria sitting beside him. In the back of the wagon, carefully wrapped, was what appeared to be a large package. Maria burst through the door moments later, her round face flushed with excitement. Evelyn, we have brought you something. Come see. The package, when unwrapped, revealed a wedding dress. It was simple, but beautiful. Cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, clearly well-made and lovingly preserved. It was mine, Maria explained, her eyes misty. When I married Miguel, my mother spent months making this dress. I wore it once, then saved it, hoping someday I would have a daughter to give it to. But we were not blessed with children. She touched the fabric gently. Now, it should be worn again. By you, if you will accept it. Evelyn felt tears spring to her eyes. Maria, I can't possibly. It's too precious. Nonsense, Maria waved away her protest. A wedding dress should be worn, not stored in a trunk collecting dust. Besides, she added with a warm smile, you are very close to the size I was when I married. It will fit you perfectly, I think. With Sarah and Maria's help, Evelyn tried on the dress. It did fit remarkably well, though it hung a bit loose through the bodice due to Evelyn's recent weight loss. Maria produced pins and quickly made adjustments, her skilled fingers working with practiced ease. There, she declared, stepping back to admire her work. Beautiful. Mr. Caleb, his eyes will fall out of his head when he sees you. Evelyn looked at herself in Sarah's full-length mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The cream silk softened her thin face, and the lace collar hid the fading scratches on her collarbone. For a moment, she looked almost like someone worthy of being a bride. But then she moved, and the dress shifted, and she caught a glimpse of the bruise on her upper arm, still visible despite the weeks of healing, a sickly yellow-green reminder of everything she was trying to leave behind. We can add longer sleeves, Sarah said quietly, following her gaze. No. Evelyn's voice was firmer than she felt. If I'm going to do this, I need to stop hiding. Caleb should see who he's really marrying. Maria and Sarah exchanged a glance, but neither argued. They finished the alterations in silence, then helped Evelyn out of the dress so she could rest before the ceremony. The wedding was set for 2 o'clock at the small church on the edge of town. It was barely noon, and Evelyn's nerves were already frayed to breaking. She picked at the lunch Maria had prepared, managing only a few bites before her stomach rebelled. Tell me honestly, she said to Sarah as they sat together in the quiet cabin. Is it normal to feel this terrified? Sarah considered the question carefully. I think it depends on what you're terrified of. Are you afraid of Caleb himself, or are you afraid of the unknown? Evelyn thought about the quiet cowboy who'd given her space and respect, who'd offered her choices instead of demands. The unknown, she admitted. I don't know how to be married to someone kind. I don't know the rules. Then maybe, Sarah suggested gently, you need to realize there aren't supposed to be rules. Marriage should be a partnership between equals, not a set of regulations designed to keep one person subservient to the other. At 1:30, they began the final preparations. Sarah helped Evelyn with her hair, pinning it up in a simple but elegant style. Maria produced a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the ranch, black-eyed Susans, purple asters, and sprigs of sage that smelled like the prairie after rain. When Evelyn was finally dressed and ready, she stood before the mirror one last time. The woman looking back was pale but composed, frightened but determined. The bruises on her arms were visible beneath the lace sleeves, testament to what she'd survived. But her eyes, though shadowed with anxiety, held something new, a fragile spark of hope. The church was small and simple, its rough-hewn pews filled with curious townspeople who'd come to witness the marriage of Caleb Turner to his mail-order bride. Evelyn felt their eyes on her as she walked down the short aisle on Samuel's arm. He'd offered to give her away when she'd mentioned having no family present. Caleb waited at the front of the church, dressed in a dark suit that looked new and slightly uncomfortable. But when his eyes met hers, Evelyn saw something that made her breath catch. Not hunger or possession, but something softer. Admiration, maybe. Or perhaps just relief that she'd actually shown up. The ceremony itself was brief. The traveling parson, a weathered man named Reverend Matthews, spoke about commitment and partnership in a voice that suggested he'd given this same speech hundreds of times. Evelyn barely heard the words. Her entire focus was on Caleb's hand holding hers, warm and steady, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles in what might have been meant as reassurance. When it came time for the vows, Caleb's voice was clear and firm. I, Caleb James Turner, take you, Evelyn May Moore, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to respect you, to provide for you, and to stand beside you as your partner and equal from this day forward. The traditional words had been changed, Evelyn realized, modified to emphasize partnership rather than obedience. Had Caleb requested that, or had the parson sensed something in their situation that called for different language? Then it was her turn. I, Evelyn May Moore, take you, Caleb James Turner, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to respect you, to support you, and to stand beside you as your partner and equal from this day forward. Her voice shook only slightly. She'd made it through. The words were spoken, the commitment made. You may kiss your bride, Reverend Matthews intoned. Evelyn's heart lurched. She'd known this moment was coming, had tried to prepare herself for it. But now, faced with the reality of physical contact, panic clawed at her throat. Caleb must have seen something in her expression because he moved slowly, deliberately, giving her time to pull away if she needed to. His hands came up to gently cup her face, and then he leaned in and pressed the briefest, softest kiss to her forehead. Not her lips. Her forehead. A gesture of tenderness rather than possession. When he pulled back, his eyes asked a silent question. Was that all right? Evelyn managed a small nod, gratitude flooding through her. He understood. Somehow, without her having to explain, he understood. The congregation clapped politely as they turned to face the small crowd. Miguel and Maria beamed from the front pew. Sarah dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even some of the townspeople who'd been skeptical seemed moved by the simple ceremony. The reception was held at the ranch with tables set up outside in the yard. Maria and several other ranch wives had prepared food, roasted beef, fresh bread, vegetables from various gardens, and pies made from early autumn apples. Someone produced a fiddle, and music filled the air as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Evelyn found herself swept into conversations with people she'd never met, all eager to welcome the new Mrs. Turner. She smiled and nodded and tried to remember names and faces, all while acutely aware of Caleb's presence nearby. He stayed close but not smothering, clearly monitoring her comfort level. As the afternoon wore into evening, Evelyn felt exhaustion creeping over her. The emotional toll of the day, combined with weeks of poor sleep and inadequate food, was catching up with her. She swayed slightly, and suddenly Caleb was there, his hand steady on her elbow. You're tired, he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. We should make our excuses. But the guests, she protested weakly, have had plenty of food and entertainment. They'll understand. He guided her toward the house with gentle insistence, pausing only to thank Miguel and Maria for their help. Inside, the house felt blessedly quiet after the noise and bustle of the reception. Caleb led her to the parlor and settled her into one of the sturdy chairs. Wait here, he instructed, then disappeared into the kitchen. He returned moments later with a glass of water and a plate containing a slice of pie. You barely ate anything today. Maria will have my hide if I don't at least try to feed you. Evelyn accepted the plate with shaking hands. Now that they were alone, truly alone for the first time as husband and wife, the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. This was her wedding night. She knew what was expected, what married men traditionally demanded of their wives. Caleb settled into the chair across from her, maintaining a careful distance. "Evelyn, look at me." She raised her eyes reluctantly, expecting to see desire or demand. Instead, she found only patient concern. "I need to be very clear about something," he said, "about what happens tonight and every night going forward." Her stomach clenched with dread. Here it came, the demands, the expectations, the price she'd have to pay for safety. "Nothing happens that you don't want to happen," Caleb continued. "Nothing. I meant what I said before. This marriage is a partnership. That includes the intimate aspects. I won't come to your bed unless and until you invite me. And if that never happens, then that's how it will be." Evelyn stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "But you're my husband now. You have rights." "I have responsibilities," he interrupted firmly. "To provide for you, to protect you, to treat you with respect. I don't have rights to your body. No man does. That's something freely given, or it's nothing at all." "You say that now," Evelyn whispered, old fear making her voice bitter. "But what happens when your patience runs out? What happens when you decide you've waited long enough?" Something flickered in Caleb's eyes, hurt, maybe, or frustration. But his voice remained calm. "Then I'll take care of my own needs in my own room, same as I have for the past 5 years. Evelyn, I didn't marry you to have a warm body in my bed. I married you because I thought we could build something together. A home. A partnership. Maybe even a family someday, if that's something you want. But all of that requires trust, and trust takes time." He stood and moved toward the stairs, then paused. "Your room is ready for you. I had Maria put fresh linens on the bed and stock the washstand. You'll find night clothes in the dresser, new ones, ordered from the catalog. There's a lock on the inside of your door. Use it if it makes you feel safer." "Caleb," Evelyn started, but he cut her off gently. "Get some rest. We can talk more tomorrow. Tonight, just sleep. You're safe here." He climbed the stairs and disappeared down the hall. A moment later, she heard his door close. Evelyn sat in the parlor for a long time, the untouched pie cooling on the plate in her lap. Her mind struggled to process what had just happened. Her husband, had just given her permission to lock him out of her bedroom, had promised not to demand his marital rights, had spoken of her body as something she had autonomy over. It felt too good to be true. It had to be too good to be true. Men didn't act this way. They took what they wanted, when they wanted it. That's what she'd learned from her uncle, from the men who'd leered at her on the streets, from every cautionary tale she'd ever heard about marriage. But Caleb Turner didn't fit those patterns. He never had. Finally, exhaustion overcame confusion. Evelyn climbed the stairs to her room, with a lock on the inside, and found everything exactly as Caleb had described. The bed was made with fresh linens that smelled of sunshine and lavender. The nightgown in the dresser was simple but new, soft cotton that wouldn't irritate her healing bruises. She changed slowly, cataloging her injuries one last time. Most of the bruises had faded to barely their shadows. The scratches were pink scars that would eventually disappear. Her ribs still ached, but no longer sent sharp pains through her chest with every deep breath. She was healing, physically, at least. As she climbed into bed, Evelyn's hand hesitated over the lock on the door. Did she need it? Caleb had given his word, and so far he'd kept every promise he'd made. But old habits died hard. Old fears died harder. She turned the lock. Just for tonight, she told herself, just until she was sure. Sleep came in fits and starts, punctuated by dreams that shifted between memory and imagination. In some, her uncle's face loomed over her, his fists raised. In others, Caleb's gentle voice promised safety she was too afraid to believe. She woke before dawn to the sound of movement in the house. For a moment, panic seized her. Someone was in the house. Someone was coming. But then she heard Caleb's voice downstairs, low and calm, speaking to someone at the door. Ranch business, she realized. The workday started early here. Evelyn lay in bed as the sky outside her window gradually lightened from black to gray to pink. This was her life now. This house, this man, this vast empty landscape so different from everything she'd known. The question was whether she could learn to trust it, or whether her past would always color her present. A knock at her door made her jump. "Evelyn?" Caleb's voice, careful and distant through the wood. "I'm heading out to check the north pasture. Maria will be here around 8 to help with breakfast. There's no rush, Sleep as long as you need. She heard his footsteps retreat down the hall, then the front door open and close. Only then did she unlock her door and venture out. The house felt different in the early morning light. Last night it had seemed full of potential threats. Now, in the gentle dawn, it simply looked like a home that needed tending. Dusty corners that could use cleaning, windows that would benefit from curtains, empty spaces that could be filled with small comforts. Evelyn made her way downstairs and found coffee already prepared on the stove, still hot. Caleb had made it before he left, she realized, left it for her to find when she woke. Such a small gesture, such a simple kindness, and yet it made her throat tight with emotions she couldn't name. She poured herself a cup and carried it to the front porch, wrapping herself in the shawl she'd found hanging by the door. The morning air was cool, not yet touched by the heat that would come later. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing peacefully. Somewhere out there, Caleb was working, tending to the land and animals that were his livelihood. Their livelihood now, she corrected herself. This was her home too, her responsibility, her chance at a different kind of life. Maria arrived precisely at 8, bustling and cheerful as always. She took one look at Evelyn's face and immediately wrapped her in a warm embrace. "How are you this morning, Mrs. Turner?" The new name felt strange on Evelyn's tongue when she tried to respond. "I'm managing," she said finally. "Good, good." Maria moved into the kitchen with practiced ease, clearly familiar with the space. "We make breakfast, yes? And then I show you where everything is kept, how Mr. Caleb likes things organized. You are the lady of the house now. You should know how to run it." They spent the morning cooking and cleaning together, with Maria explaining the routines of ranch life. The hands ate their main meal at midday, she explained, so lunch needed to be substantial. Breakfast was simple but hearty. Dinner was whatever could be managed after a long day's work. "Mr. Caleb, he is not particular about food," Maria said as she showed Evelyn the pantry. "He eats to live, not lives to eat, you understand? But he appreciates good cooking when he gets it. My Miguel says Mr. Caleb has been eating like a bachelor too long. Beans and beef and bread always the same." As they worked, Evelyn found herself relaxing into the familiar rhythms of household tasks. Cooking, she knew. Cleaning, she understood. These were skills she'd developed over years of managing her father's household, then her uncle's, though the latter had rarely appreciated her efforts. At noon, the ranch hands came in for lunch. They removed their hats and washed at the basin by the door before settling around the large kitchen table. Caleb arrived last, his eyes immediately seeking out Evelyn. "How are you settling in?" he asked quietly as he took his seat. "Well enough." She placed a platter of roasted chicken on the table, along with potatoes and fresh bread. "Maria has been very helpful." The meal was eaten mostly in silence, with the men focused on their food after a morning of hard work. But Evelyn was aware of Caleb's presence at the head of the table, the way his eyes occasionally flicked toward her as if checking that she was all right. After lunch, the hands returned to work, and Maria prepared to leave. "You will be fine," she assured Evelyn. "Tomorrow, I show you the garden, yes? And the chickens. You will learn everything, don't worry." Alone in the house, Evelyn spent the afternoon exploring more thoroughly. She found Caleb's small office, with the ledgers carefully maintained and correspondence neatly filed. She discovered a pantry well-stocked but disorganized. She located linens that needed mending and rooms that needed a woman's touch. This could be a home, she thought. With work and time and care, this could be a real home. As the sun began to set, she heard Caleb return. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, dusty and tired, and stopped short when he saw her standing at the stove. "You didn't have to cook," he said. "I told Maria—" "I wanted to," Evelyn interrupted. "I need to learn to manage the household. And besides, I like cooking. It gives me something useful to do." She'd made a simple stew, nothing fancy, but the kitchen smelled of herbs and simmering meat. Caleb's expression softened. "It smells wonderful." He moved to the basin to wash up. "Give me a minute to clean up, and I'll be happy to eat whatever you've made." They ate at the kitchen table, just the two of them in the gathering twilight. The conversation was halting at first, filled with long silences, but gradually they found safe topics. The ranch, the weather, plans for the coming autumn. "Winter comes early here," Caleb explained. "By November, we'll likely see snow. We'll need to make sure we're well stocked with supplies before the passes become impassable." "What do you need me to do to prepare?" Evelyn asked. The question seemed to please him. "Maria can show you how we preserve food for winter. We'll need to slaughter a steer in October, salt the meat, make sure we have enough firewood laid in. It's a lot of work, but we'll manage." After dinner, they settled in the parlor. Caleb pulled out a ledger to review accounts, while Evelyn found some mending that needed doing. It was domestic and peaceful, and so far removed from her old life that it felt surreal. "Evelyn," Caleb said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Her hand stilled on the shirt she was mending. "All right. Are you happy here? Or at least content enough to stay?" The question caught her off guard. She thought about it carefully before answering. "I don't know if I remember what happiness feels like," she admitted, "but I'm not afraid here. At least not the way I was before. That's something." He nodded slowly, accepting her answer. "That's a start, then." They sat together until the light faded completely and Caleb had to light lamps. Finally, as the hour grew late, they both rose to retire. At the bottom of the stairs, Caleb paused. "Evelyn, there's something I want to give you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. It was my mother's. "I meant to give it to you earlier, but the day got away from me." Inside the box was a delicate gold ring set with a small sapphire. It was beautiful, simple but precious, clearly treasured. "I can't accept this," Evelyn whispered. "It's too valuable, too meaningful." "You're my wife," Caleb said simply. "It should be yours. My mother would have wanted you to have it." With trembling fingers, Evelyn allowed him to slip the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Thank you," she managed. "I'll treasure it." They stood there for a moment, the weight of all the unspoken words hanging between them. Then Caleb stepped back, creating distance. "Sleep well, Evelyn." "You too, Caleb." In her room, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the ring on her finger. The sapphire caught the lamplight, throwing tiny blue sparkles across the wall. She thought about the man who'd given it to her, the man who'd promised patience, who'd offered safety, who'd kept his word even when it would have been easy not to. For the first time since answering that advertisement months ago, Evelyn allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice. The bruises beneath her dress were fading. The scars on her soul would take longer. But here, in this quiet house, with this quiet man, perhaps they could finally begin to heal. She unlocked her door before climbing into bed. It was a small gesture, a tentative offering of trust. Caleb wouldn't know, wouldn't come to check, but she would know. And that was enough for now. The weeks that followed the wedding fell into a rhythm that surprised Evelyn with its steadiness. Each morning, she woke to the sound of Caleb moving quietly through the house, preparing coffee before heading out to start his work. Each evening, he returned dusty and tired, but never too tired to ask about her day, to listen when she spoke about small domestic victories or frustrations. The unlocked door became her silent declaration of growing trust, though neither of them ever spoke of it. Caleb maintained his respectful distance, sleeping in his own room, never presuming, never pushing. And slowly, day by careful day, Evelyn began to believe that his promises weren't just empty words spoken to placate her. By mid-September, the bruises had faded completely, leaving only the faintest shadows on her pale skin that would disappear entirely with time. Her ribs no longer ached when she took deep breaths. She'd gained back some of the weight she'd lost during those terrible final months in Philadelphia, her face filling out until she no longer looked quite so haggard and haunted. Maria had become not just a teacher but a friend, showing Evelyn the intricacies of frontier life with patient good humor. Together they tended the garden, harvested the last of the summer vegetables, and began the work of preserving food for winter. Evelyn learned to can tomatoes and beans, to pickle cucumbers, to dry herbs and store root vegetables in the cool cellar beneath the house. "You have good hands for this work," Maria observed one afternoon as they worked side by side in the kitchen, steam rising from the pots where jars were being sterilized. "Strong and capable. Mr. Caleb is lucky to have you." Evelyn looked down at her hands, no longer the soft, pale hands of a city girl, but reddened and roughened from labor. She'd earned calluses from garden work, Small burns from cooking, cuts from learning to handle the chickens Maria had helped her acquire. These were the hands of someone who worked, who contributed, who had purpose. "I think I'm the lucky one," she said quietly. That evening, as she and Caleb sat together after dinner, him reviewing account books while she mended torn work shirts, Evelyn found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. He'd become familiar to her now, in ways she hadn't expected. She knew the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was tired, the slight crease between his eyebrows when he was concentrating, the rare but genuine smile that transformed his entire face when something pleased him. He was handsome, she'd come to realize, in a weathered, understated way. Not pretty like the dandies she'd seen in Philadelphia, but solid and real, trustworthy. The thought no longer frightened her as much as it once had. "There's a dance in town this Saturday," Caleb said, breaking the comfortable silence. "To celebrate the harvest. I thought we might attend, if you're comfortable with it." Evelyn's needles stilled. A dance meant crowds, socializing, being on display as the new Mrs. Turner. The thought made her anxious, but it also sparked something else, a tiny flicker of curiosity about what normal life might feel like. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself. "Though I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I," Caleb admitted with a hint of that rare smile. "We'll muddle through together." Saturday arrived with the crispness of early autumn in the air. Evelyn, dressed carefully in the blue calico Sarah had given her, now altered to fit her better-nourished frame. She'd learned to manage her hair without Sarah's help, pinning it up in a style that was simple but neat. When she came downstairs, Caleb was waiting in the parlor, dressed in the same dark suit he'd worn for their wedding. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her flush with pleasure. The town hall was decorated with late-season wildflowers and lit by dozens of lanterns. People filled the space, ranchers and their families, townspeople, even a few cowboys from neighboring spreads who'd come for the music and dancing. A makeshift band consisting of 2 fiddles, a guitar, and someone's enthusiastic but off-key singing provided the entertainment. Evelyn felt the familiar weight of curious stares as she and Caleb entered. She was still a novelty, the mail-order bride, the mysterious woman from back east who'd agreed to marry a man she'd never met. But the stares felt different now, less judgmental and more simply curious. Sarah and Samuel found them almost immediately, with Sarah linking her arm through Evelyn's like they were old friends. "You have to try Mrs. Henderson's apple pie," she insisted. "She guards the recipe like it's gold, but I'm determined to figure it out." The evening passed in a blur of introductions and small talk. Evelyn met the postmaster and his wife, the blacksmith, the owner of the general store. Each person welcomed her to Redemption Creek with varying degrees of warmth, and she found herself relaxing into the social interaction in a way she hadn't thought possible. When the music shifted to a slower tune, Caleb appeared at her elbow. "Dance with me?" It wasn't really a question, but it wasn't a demand either, an invitation she could accept or decline. Evelyn placed her hand in his and let him lead her to the makeshift dance floor. He held her carefully, maintaining a respectful distance even as they moved to the music. His hand at her waist was light, his grip on her hand gentle but secure. Evelyn realized with a start that this was the most physical contact they'd had since their wedding day, and she wasn't afraid. "You're doing fine," Caleb murmured as she stumbled slightly. "Just follow my lead." "That's what I'm worried about," she replied, but there was a hint of humor in her voice that surprised them both. They danced 2 more songs before Evelyn begged for a rest, laughing breathlessly as they made their way to the refreshment table. It felt strange, this lightness, this almost happiness. Foreign, but not unwelcome. As the evening wore on, Evelyn found herself watching the couples around them with new eyes. She saw Miguel and Maria, married for over 30 years, still looking at each other with obvious affection. She saw younger couples, newly married like herself and Caleb, navigating the early days of their unions with varying degrees of success. She saw what marriage could be when it wasn't built on violence and fear. The ride home was quiet, both of them tired but content. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear autumn sky, and the air smelled of sage and distant pine. "Thank you for tonight," Evelyn said as they approached the ranch. "I enjoyed myself more than I expected to." We'll make it a regular thing then, Caleb replied. Once a month when the weather permits. Give you a chance to socialize, make friends. This life can be isolating for women. In the house, they followed their now familiar routine, Caleb banking the fire while Evelyn prepared a pot of tea they'd share before retiring. But tonight, as they sat together in the parlor, Evelyn found herself reluctant to end the evening. Caleb, she began, then hesitated, unsure how to voice what she was feeling. Yes? His attention was completely on her, patient and open. I want to tell you something about why I came here, about what I was running from. She saw him tense slightly, then deliberately relax. Only if you want to. You don't owe me your past, Evelyn. I know. And she did know. That was what made this easier. She wasn't confessing under duress or obligation. She was choosing to share. But I think you should know. I think I need you to know. He waited, saying nothing, giving her space to find the words. My father died when I was 19, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion building in her chest. He was a clerk, made a modest living, left me a small inheritance, nothing grand but enough to live on carefully. My uncle Marcus was named executor until I turned 25 or married. Caleb's jaw tightened, and she could see he was already anticipating where this was going. At first, he seemed kind enough. Let me stay in my father's house, didn't interfere too much. But then he started drinking more, gambling. The inheritance began disappearing. When I questioned him about it, She paused, her hand unconsciously moving to where the bruises on her ribs had been. He didn't like being questioned. He hit you. Caleb's voice was flat, controlled, but Evelyn could hear the anger simmering beneath. Among other things. She forced herself to continue, to speak the truth she'd kept hidden for so long. It got worse over time. The drinking, the violence. He'd fly into rages over nothing, a meal that wasn't to his liking, a dress he thought too fine for someone living on his charity. He never touched me inappropriately, she added quickly, seeing Caleb's hands clench into fists. But the beatings were bad enough. Why didn't you leave sooner? The question held no judgment, only genuine confusion. Where would I go? I had no money of my own. He controlled everything, no family besides him, no job skills that would support me. I was trapped. She met Caleb's eyes, needing him to understand. When I saw your advertisement, it felt like divine intervention. A way out. A chance to escape before he killed me, because I truly believe that's where it was heading. Caleb stood abruptly and crossed to the window, his back rigid with tension. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I wish I'd known. I wish I could have gotten you out of there sooner. You saved me anyway, Evelyn said softly. You just didn't know it. He turned to face her, and in the lamplight she could see the emotion in his eyes. Anger at what she'd endured, yes, but also something that looked like pain on her behalf. Is he looking for you? Caleb asked. This uncle of yours? I don't know. I left in the middle of the night, took only what I could carry. Bought a train ticket to Denver with money I'd been hiding for months. He might not even care that I'm gone, as long as he still has access to what's left of the inheritance. And if he does come looking? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Evelyn saw the set of Caleb's jaw, the protective stance of his shoulders, and understood what he was really asking. Then he'll find I have a husband now, she said. One who won't let him hurt me again. Caleb crossed back to her and dropped to one knee beside her chair, bringing them to eye level. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was its own kind of comfort. I need you to hear me, Evelyn, and really believe what I'm saying. No one will hurt you again. Not while I'm alive to prevent it. Your uncle, or anyone else who thinks they have a right to your submission or your pain, they'll have to go through me first. And I promise you, that's not an easy thing to do. The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have frightened her, but instead it made her feel safe in a way she'd never experienced. This wasn't a man who would use his strength to hurt her. This was a man who would use it to shield her. I believe you, she whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, Caleb kneeling beside her chair, Evelyn with tears streaming silently down her face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being able to share her burden. Finally, Caleb rose and offered her his hand. Come on, you're exhausted and tomorrow's another work day. At the top of the stairs, they paused outside their respective rooms. The familiar routine of saying goodnight had taken on a different quality after the evening's revelations. "Caleb," Evelyn said as he started toward his door, "thank you for listening, for not making me feel ashamed." "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he replied firmly. "The shame belongs to the man who hurt you, not to you for surviving him." That night, Evelyn slept more soundly than she had in years. The weight of her secret, no longer carried alone, felt lighter. And knowing that Caleb understood where she'd come from and still wanted her here made the darkness seem less threatening. The next morning brought the first real cold snap of autumn. Evelyn woke to frost on the windows and the distant sound of cattle lowing as the hands moved them to lower pastures. She dressed warmly and went downstairs to find Caleb already in the kitchen, coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. "You cooked?" she asked, surprised. "Don't get used to it," he replied with a slight smile. "But I figured you might sleep in after last night. Besides, I make decent biscuits when I put my mind to it." They were decent biscuits, though not quite as light as Maria's. They ate together in comfortable silence, and when Caleb rose to head out to work, Evelyn found herself calling after him. "Be careful out there. It looks cold." He paused in the doorway, something warm and pleased crossing his face. "I will. You stay warm too." It was such a small moment, such an ordinary exchange between husband and wife. But for Evelyn, it represented something profound, the kind of casual, affectionate concern that characterized a real marriage, not based on fear or obligation, but on genuine care. The days grew shorter and colder as September gave way to October. Evelyn threw herself into the work of preparing the household for winter with an intensity that sometimes surprised her. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore. She was building something, a home, a life, a future she could actually imagine living. Maria taught her to render fat for soap and candles, to preserve meat and salt and smoke, to make sure the root cellar was properly stocked and organized. Evelyn learned which herbs could be dried for winter use, which vegetables could be stored, how to make the most of every resource the land provided. "You are becoming a true ranch wife," Maria observed one afternoon, as they worked together in the kitchen, surrounded by jars of preserved food. "Strong and capable. Mr. Caleb must be very proud." Was he proud? Evelyn wasn't sure, but she'd noticed the way his eyes softened when he came home to find dinner waiting, the small nod of approval when he saw how she'd organized the pantry, the quiet "thank you" when she mended his clothes or ensured his work gear was clean and ready. One evening in late October, a storm rolled in from the mountains, the first real snow of the season. Evelyn stood at the kitchen window, watching the white flakes swirl in the lamplight, fascinated by the wild beauty of it. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Caleb's voice came from behind her, and she felt rather than saw him move to stand beside her. "Also dangerous if you're not prepared for it. This is just a taste. Come January and February, we'll see storms that'll bury the barn." "I can't imagine," Evelyn said softly. "You'll learn." There was confidence in his voice, faith that she would adapt and survive and even thrive in this harsh landscape. The storm lasted 3 days, trapping them all on the ranch. The hands stayed in the bunkhouse, emerging only to tend to the animals and ensure nothing was damaged by the heavy snow. Evelyn and Caleb were effectively isolated in the main house, thrown into closer proximity than they'd experienced since their wedding. It could have been awkward. Instead, it revealed a comfortable domestic partnership that had grown between them almost without Evelyn noticing. They cooked together, Caleb proving surprisingly competent at simple tasks when directed. They sat by the fire reading. Caleb had a small collection of books, mostly practical manuals, but also a few novels that Evelyn devoured gratefully. They talked about the ranch, about plans for the spring, about everything and nothing. On the third night, as the storm finally began to ease, Evelyn found herself watching Caleb as he sat across from her, his attention focused on a ledger. The lamplight caught the planes of his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles around his eyes from squinting into the sun. He looked up and caught her staring. "What is it?" "Nothing," she said quickly, then reconsidered. Honesty had served her better in this marriage than deflection ever had. "I was just thinking about how different this is from what I expected." Different better or different worse? There was vulnerability in the question that touched her. "Better," she said firmly. "So much better than I ever imagined possible." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Relief, maybe, or hope. He set down his ledger and leaned forward slightly. Evelyn, I need to tell you something, and I want you to really hear me. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I know we started this marriage as a practical arrangement, mutual benefit, nothing more. But somewhere along the way, it's become more than that for me. I've come to care for you, not just as a partner in running this ranch, but as a person, a woman I admire and respect and, he hesitated, and have feelings for. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. She'd sensed the growing connection between them, had felt it in the small touches that no longer made her flinch, in the lingering glances, in the way her day felt incomplete until Caleb returned home. But hearing him voice it made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. I care for you too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think I could feel this way about anyone. Didn't think I'd ever trust a man enough to let myself care. But you're different, Caleb. You've been patient and kind and everything I needed without even knowing what I needed. He stood and crossed to her chair, then knelt beside it the way he had that night weeks ago when she'd told him about her uncle. But this time, when he reached for her hand, it wasn't just for comfort. It was an invitation to something more. I don't want to rush you, he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. We can keep going exactly as we have been, separate rooms and careful distance, for as long as you need. But I also want you to know that when and if you're ready for more, I'm here. I want to be a real husband to you in every way, but only when you want that too. Evelyn looked down at their joined hands, his large and work-roughened, hers smaller, but no longer soft and delicate. These were hands that had built something together over the past months. A home. A partnership. Trust. I'm not ready yet, she said honestly. There are still moments when I flinch at sudden movements, when I wake up from nightmares about my uncle. But I'm getting there, Caleb, and I want you to know that when I'm ready, it's you I want. No one else. You. The smile that spread across his face was radiant. That's enough for me. More than enough. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, then rose and returned to his chair. They sat together until the fire burned low, not touching but connected in ways that went deeper than physical contact. That night, Evelyn stood in her doorway for a long moment before retiring. Down the hall, she could see light beneath Caleb's door. He was still awake, probably reading or reviewing accounts. She could go to him, could cross that threshold and begin building the physical intimacy that their emotional connection had already prepared the ground for. But she wasn't quite ready. Not yet, soon perhaps, but not tonight. Still, as she climbed into bed, Evelyn realized something profound had changed. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She wasn't just existing in a state of grateful relief at having escaped her uncle's violence. She was actually living, building, hoping, feeling things she'd thought were dead inside her. The bruises beneath her wedding dress had long since faded, but the scars they'd left, the invisible ones on her soul, were beginning to heal too. Not because time had passed, but because Caleb Turner had given her something precious, the space and safety to heal at her own pace, without pressure or expectation. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world blanketed in pristine white. Tomorrow would bring new work, clearing paths, checking on animals, ensuring no damage had been done. But tonight, Evelyn allowed herself to simply rest in the knowledge that she was safe, valued, and slowly learning what it meant to be loved. The long Colorado winter stretched ahead, full of challenges and hardship, but for the first time in her life, Evelyn wasn't facing it alone. She had a partner, a home, and the growing certainty that she'd finally found the place where she belonged. Winter settled over the Turner Ranch with a vengeance that tested even the most seasoned frontiersmen. November brought storms that buried fences and turned the landscape into an endless white expanse. December was worse, with temperatures that plummeted so low that water froze in buckets within minutes of being drawn from the well. But inside the ranch house, warmth bloomed in ways that had nothing to do with the fires crackling in the hearths. Evelyn had found her rhythm in the household, moving through each day with growing confidence. She'd learned to read the weather signs, to anticipate the needs of the ranch hands before they voiced them, to manage the household with an efficiency that would have made her father proud. More than that, she'd learned to read Caleb, The subtle shifts in his expression that told her when he was worried about the cattle, the way his shoulders relaxed when he came home to find everything running smoothly, the rare smile that appeared when she said something that surprised or pleased him. They'd grown closer through the forced intimacy of winter isolation. Evenings were spent together in the parlor, Caleb teaching Evelyn to play chess while she taught him card games her father had shown her. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. His childhood memories of building the ranch with his father, her memories of her mother who'd died when she was young, dreams for the future that no longer felt impossibly distant. And slowly, carefully, they'd begun to bridge the physical distance that had characterized their early marriage. A hand resting on a shoulder as one passed behind the other's chair. Fingers brushing as they worked side by side preparing meals. Standing close enough to share warmth while watching snow fall outside the kitchen window. Small touches that Evelyn no longer flinched from, but instead found herself seeking out. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. There were still moments when old fears surfaced. A raised voice from one of the ranch hands would make her tense. A sudden movement in her peripheral vision would cause her heart to race. But Caleb noticed these moments and responded with patience rather than frustration. He'd learned to move deliberately around her, to announce his presence before entering a room, to give her space when she needed it. "You're healing," Sarah observed one afternoon when she'd come to visit, watching Evelyn move comfortably around her own kitchen. "Not just your body, that happened months ago. Your spirit is healing too." Evelyn paused in her work, considering the words. "I think you're right. There are whole days now when I don't think about Philadelphia at all. When I don't see my uncle's face in my nightmares." "That's how you know you're building a real life here," Sarah said warmly, "when the present becomes more vivid than the past." It was a Tuesday evening in mid-January when everything changed. The day had been brutally cold, with winds that howled across the prairie and drove snow into drifts that reached the lower windows of the house. Caleb had been out since before dawn, helping the hands break ice on the watering holes and ensuring the cattle hadn't strayed too far from shelter. The work was dangerous in weather like this. Men had been known to get disoriented in the blinding snow, to wander just yards from safety, and freeze to death before finding their way back. Evelyn knew this, had heard the stories from Maria about winters past when the ranch had lost good men to the brutal cold. She'd spent the day in a state of low-grade anxiety, checking the windows every half hour for signs of the men returning. Maria had come over mid-morning to help with bread making, but even her cheerful presence couldn't completely ease Evelyn's worry. "He knows what he's doing," Maria assured her. "Mr. Caleb, he has survived many winters. He will not take foolish risks." But as the afternoon wore into evening and the light began to fail, Evelyn's anxiety transformed into genuine fear. She stood at the kitchen window, peering out into the swirling white, willing Caleb's familiar form to appear. When he finally came in, hours after dark, he was half frozen despite his heavy coat. His fingers were white with cold, his face raw from the wind, and ice had formed in his beard and eyebrows. Evelyn took one look at him and immediately sprang into action, her fear transforming into focused determination. "Sit," she commanded, pulling a chair close to the fire. "Don't argue with me, Caleb Turner. You're half dead from the cold." He was too tired and frozen to protest. She helped him out of his ice-crusted coat and boots, her hands working quickly but carefully. His fingers were stiff and unresponsive, a dangerous sign. She'd learned from Sarah about frostbite, about the permanent damage that could occur if frozen flesh wasn't treated properly. She brought warm water, not hot, carefully heated to just above body temperature, and gently submerged his hands. Caleb hissed with pain as feeling began to return, but Evelyn held his hands steady in the water, murmuring soft reassurances. "I know it hurts. That's good. It means there's no permanent damage. Just hold on. It'll pass." She repeated the process with his feet, then wrapped him in blankets and pressed a mug of hot coffee into his hands once feeling had fully returned to his fingers. All the while, she kept up a steady stream of gentle scolding. "You shouldn't have stayed out so long. You could have gotten lost in the storm, frozen to death before anyone found you. What were you thinking, Caleb? The cattle aren't worth your life." "The cattle needed tending," Caleb said through chattering teeth, his voice rough from hours of breathing icy air. "Couldn't let them die because it was cold. We'd lose half the herd, maybe more. That's our livelihood, Evelyn, our future. And what good would you be to them dead? Evelyn shot back, her voice sharp with fear that was only now beginning to ease. She knelt in front of him, checking his feet carefully for signs of frostbite, looking for the telltale white or grayish patches that would indicate serious damage. "You're not invincible, Caleb. You need to take care of yourself too." He looked down at her, and something shifted in his expression. His hand came up to touch her face, his cold fingers gentle against her warm cheek. "You were worried about me." It wasn't a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. "Of course I was worried. You're my husband. She paused, the word she'd been holding back for weeks suddenly demanding to be spoken. "I love you, Caleb. The thought of losing you, of you not coming back from that storm, it terrifies me more than anything my uncle ever did to me." The confession hung in the air between them, weighted with all the meaning she'd poured into it. It was the first time either of them had spoken the word love directly, though it had been present in their actions for months, in every gentle touch, every patient word, every moment of understanding. Caleb set down his coffee mug with hands that were no longer shaking from cold, but from emotion. He reached for her hands, pulling her up so they were face to face, his blue-gray eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Say it again," he said softly, his voice rough with something that had nothing to do with the cold. "Please, Evelyn, say it again so I know I didn't imagine it. I love you." And this time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. Just pure, simple truth spoken from a heart that had learned it was safe to love again. "I love you, Caleb Turner. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day when you gave me a choice instead of making demands. Since you showed me what it meant to be treated with respect and kindness. I love you too, Evelyn." His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones, tracing the shape of her face as if memorizing it. "Have for a while now, if I'm being honest. Was just waiting for you to feel safe enough to hear it. Waiting for you to trust that I meant it, that it wasn't just words." He stood, drawing her up with him, and for a long moment they simply stood there, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. Evelyn could feel the warmth returning to his body, could hear his heartbeat steadying to its normal rhythm. "I know I promised to wait," Caleb said quietly. "Promised to give you time, to let you come to me when you were ready, but I need to ask now, need to know, are you ready, Evelyn? For us to be husband and wife in more than just name? Because if you're not, that's fine. I'll wait as long as you need, but if you are ready, if you want what I want—" "Yes," Evelyn whispered, cutting off his words with the certainty in her voice. "I'm ready, Caleb. I want this. I want you. I want us to have a real marriage in every way." The kiss that followed was unlike their chaste wedding kiss or the brief touches they'd shared in recent weeks. This was desire unleashed after months of careful restraint, need tempered by tenderness, passion made deeper by the love that had grown between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Are you absolutely sure?" he asked one more time, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. "Because once we cross this threshold, I don't want you to have any regrets. Don't want you to feel like I rushed you or took advantage." "I'm sure," Evelyn said firmly, rising on her toes to kiss him again. "I trust you, Caleb. With my body, with my heart, with everything I am. I want this. I want you. I'm choosing this, choosing us, with full knowledge and complete certainty." He swept her up into his arms, making her gasp with surprise and delight, and carried her up the stairs to his room, their room now, she realized. No more separate spaces, no more careful distance. They were finally, truly coming together as one. What happened behind that closed door was private, sacred, the final healing of wounds that had run soul deep. But it was everything Evelyn had needed it to be, gentle and patient, and full of the love that had grown between them like something wild and precious in harsh soil. Caleb worshipped her body with reverent hands, erasing the memory of violence with tenderness. He showed her what intimacy could be when it was freely chosen, when it was an expression of love rather than an exercise of power. And Evelyn discovered that her body, which she'd come to think of as damaged and broken, was capable of joy. That pleasure wasn't something to be afraid of, that vulnerability in the right hands could be beautiful rather than terrifying. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the warmth of blankets and each other, Evelyn traced the scar on Caleb's shoulder from his old riding accident, marveling at how comfortable she felt in her own skin for the first time in years. "I never thought I could feel safe like this," she admitted quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "With someone. In this way. I thought that part of me was dead, killed by everything my uncle did." Caleb pressed a kiss to her forehead, then to each of her eyelids, tender and affirming. "You're not dead, Evelyn. You're the most alive person I know. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you came out the other side still capable of love and trust. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever witnessed. I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "Without your patience and understanding. Without you showing me that not all men are like my uncle, that marriage doesn't have to be a prison." "We healed each other," Caleb said simply. "I was just existing before you came, Evelyn. Going through the motions of life without really living. You taught me what it means to share your life with another person, to build something meaningful together." They spent that night and the next 2 days mostly in their room, venturing out only for necessities and to ensure the ranch hands had what they needed. The storm raged outside, but inside they created their own world, learning each other's bodies and hearts with the patience and thoroughness that had characterized their entire relationship, talking for hours about hopes and dreams and the future they would build together, building the intimate foundation their marriage had been missing. When they finally emerged, something had fundamentally shifted between them. The careful distance was gone, replaced by casual touches and shared glances that spoke volumes to anyone who cared to notice. They moved around each other in the kitchen with a comfortable synchronicity, Caleb's hand finding the small of Evelyn's back as he passed behind her, Evelyn's fingers trailing across his shoulders as she set his coffee in front of him. Miguel noticed it first, his weathered face creasing into a knowing smile when he came to the house for his weekly meeting with Caleb and found them together, Caleb's hand resting comfortably on Evelyn's waist as she stirred a pot on the stove. "About time," he muttered to Maria that evening when he returned to their cabin. "That man's been walking around like a lovesick calf for months, trying to pretend he wasn't. Good to see him finally happy, finally complete." Maria just smiled knowingly, her expression smug with the satisfaction of having predicted this outcome from the very beginning. "I told you," she said. "From the first day I saw them together, I knew. Some people are meant to heal each other." February brought a brief thaw that fooled the prairie into thinking spring might come early. Patches of brown earth appeared through the melting snow, and the cattle ventured further from the shelter of the barn in search of grass. It was during this fall spring that the visitors arrived. Evelyn was in the kitchen preparing bread, her hands deep in dough, when she heard horses approaching. She looked out the window and saw 3 riders she didn't recognize dismounting near the barn. Something about the lead rider made her stomach clench with sudden, visceral dread, a physical reaction her body had before her mind fully processed what she was seeing. She couldn't see his face clearly from this distance, but the set of his shoulders, the aggressive way he moved, the entitled swagger in his walk. It was familiar in a way that made her break out in a cold sweat, despite the warmth of the kitchen. Caleb must have seen them too because he emerged from the barn where he'd been working on repairing tack, wiping his hands on a rag. Evelyn watched through the window as the lead rider approached him, gesturing angrily even from a distance. Even from here, she could see Caleb's posture change, his shoulders squaring as he placed himself between the stranger and the house, a protective stance she recognized. Then the wind shifted, carrying voices toward the house, and she heard words that made her blood run cold. "My niece, Evelyn Moore, and you'll tell me where she is, or I'll have the law on you for kidnapping and God knows what else. She's a disturbed girl, prone to flights of fancy and delusion, needs family to look after her properly." Marcus. Her uncle had found her. The dough slipped from Evelyn's nerveless fingers as panic crashed over her like a physical wave. For a moment, she was transported back to that dark house in Philadelphia, cowering in corners and calculating which bruises would show beneath her clothes, listening to her uncle's footsteps and trying to predict his mood by the heaviness of his tread. Her hands shook so badly she had to grip the edge of the counter to stay upright, her breath coming in short gasps that didn't seem to bring enough air. All the progress she'd made, all the healing, it felt like it was crumbling beneath the weight of old fear. But then she looked down at her hands, flour-dusted and strong, hands that had kneaded countless loaves of bread, tended a garden, held her husband with love instead of fear. These weren't the hands of a victim anymore. These were the hands of a woman who had built a life, who had found her strength. And she had a husband now, a man who had promised to protect her, who had proven through months of patient action that his promises meant something. Evelyn grabbed her shawl and stepped out onto the porch, her legs unsteady but her resolve firm. Caleb saw her immediately, and she caught the flash of concern in his eyes. He knew what this confrontation would cost her emotionally. But when she shook her head slightly, letting him know she needed to face this, he gave a small nod of understanding. Marcus turned at the sound of the door, and his face underwent a transformation, twisted into an expression of false concern that didn't reach his cold eyes, a performance for the benefit of the men with him and anyone else who might be watching. "Evelyn, thank heavens. I've been searching for you for months, worried sick. When you disappeared in the middle of the night without a word, I thought something terrible had happened, feared you'd been abducted or worse." His voice was pitched to Carrie, to paint himself as the concerned relative and her as the wayward girl who'd caused him such worry. But Evelyn had learned to see through his performances. She'd spent too many years watching him play the respectable guardian in public while being a monster in private. "Nothing terrible happened, Uncle Marcus," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt, drawing strength from Caleb's solid presence nearby. "I left, of my own free will, because staying with you had become unbearable and dangerous." She saw his eyes narrow fractionally at her direct contradiction, saw the flash of anger he quickly tried to suppress. He wasn't used to her talking back, to her challenging his narrative. "You're not thinking clearly, girl. The shock of your father's death affected your mind, made you paranoid and irrational. You need to come home where I can take care of you properly, where you can receive the medical attention you clearly need." He started toward the porch, his movement deliberately slow and non-threatening for the benefit of their audience. But Evelyn could see the calculation in his eyes. Caleb moved to block him, and there was something in the way he positioned his body, relaxed but ready, still but coiled with potential violence, that made Marcus stop short. "She's not going anywhere with you," Caleb said, his voice deadly calm in the way that Evelyn had learned meant he was at his most dangerous. "Evelyn is my wife now, legally and in every other way. Whatever claim you think you have on her ended the day we married." Marcus's face flushed red with anger, the mask of concern slipping dangerously. "Wife? You married some frontier nobody without my permission? The marriage isn't legal. As her guardian until she's 25, I had to approve any marriage contract. You've essentially kidnapped her and forced her into an illegal union." "I'm 24, Evelyn interrupted, finding her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "And I needed no one's permission to marry. The law doesn't require guardian approval for a woman of my age to consent to marriage. I know because I checked before I answered Caleb's advertisement." She saw uncertainty flash across Marcus's face, quickly hidden. He hadn't expected her to know the law, to have the confidence and knowledge to contradict him so directly. She'd always been so cowed, so easy to manipulate with legal-sounding threats. "Regardless of technicalities," Marcus blustered, shifting tactics. "You're coming back to Philadelphia with me. You have responsibilities there, an estate to manage, family obligations, an estate you've been systematically plundering," Evelyn said coldly, her fear transforming into anger as she spoke truths she'd never dared voice before. "Don't pretend this is about my welfare or family duty, Uncle. This is about money, about losing your access to what's left of my father's savings, about losing your meal ticket now that I'm beyond your control. How dare you accuse me of—" Marcus started forward again, his face contorted with genuine rage now, the mask completely dropped. "I dare because it's true," Evelyn said, her voice ringing clear and strong. She stepped off the porch, and she felt Caleb move to stand beside her, not in front of her, not shielding her like she was weak, but beside her as an equal partner. "You spent years beating me into submission, making me believe I was worthless and alone. You stole my inheritance, drank away my security, and used your fist to keep me too frightened to question you." She pulled up the sleeve of her dress, revealing the faint scars that remained from the worst of the violence, marks that would never completely fade. "You did this. And worse, you made me sleep on the floor because you said I didn't deserve a bed. You locked me in the cellar for days when I displeased you. You told me I was lucky you tolerated my presence at all. Marcus lunged toward her, his hand raised in the automatic gesture of violence she remembered so well. But Caleb was faster, much faster, stepping between them and catching Marcus's wrist in an iron grip. "Don't," Caleb said softly, and there was something in his voice, something cold and dangerous and absolutely certain, that made the two men who'd come with Marcus take several steps back. "Don't even think about touching her. You raise your hand to my wife, and you'll lose it. That's not a threat, that's a promise." "She's my niece, my responsibility." "She's my wife," Caleb interrupted, his grip on Marcus's wrist tightening visibly. "And this is my land. You're trespassing, and you just attempted to assault a woman in front of multiple witnesses." He gestured with his free hand to where Miguel and the other ranch hands had gathered, all watching with hard expressions and hands resting on their belts, near where they kept various tools that could serve as weapons if needed. "Now," Caleb continued, his voice never rising but somehow carrying absolute authority, "you have two choices. You can leave peacefully, get back on your horse, and ride out of Colorado and never come back. Or I can have my men escort you off my property in a manner that I guarantee you won't enjoy. And then I can ride into Redemption Creek and file assault charges with the sheriff, who happens to be a good friend of mine. Your choice, but you need to make it right now." Marcus jerked his hand free, his face purple with impotent rage. Evelyn could see him calculating, trying to figure out if he had any leverage, any way to salvage the situation. "This isn't over," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "I'll get a lawyer. I'll contest the marriage. I'll have you arrested for kidnapping and corruption of a minor. She's 24, not a minor," Caleb said calmly. "And good luck finding a lawyer willing to take your case. Because while you're explaining things to him, you might want to mention why your niece fled your care in the middle of the night with bruises covering her entire body. I can testify to that, as can the doctor in Denver who examined her when she first arrived in Colorado. Dr. Samuel Chen here," he gestured to where Samuel had joined the group of watching men, "can also testify to the injuries he treated when she first came to Redemption Creek. Injuries consistent with repeated physical abuse over an extended period." It was partially a bluff. Evelyn had never been examined by a doctor in Denver, only by Samuel weeks after her arrival when some of the bruises were already fading. But Marcus didn't know that, couldn't know which parts of Caleb's statement were fact and which were strategic exaggeration. She saw the exact moment Marcus realized he was beaten, at least for now. The calculation in his eyes, the way he took an involuntary step backward. "You're dead to me," he spat at Evelyn, his voice thick with venom. "You hear me, girl? Dead! And when that inheritance runs out, when he realizes what a burden you are, don't come crawling back to me for help." "Good," Evelyn replied, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I'd rather be dead to you and alive to myself than the other way around. You don't get to hurt me anymore, Uncle Marcus. You don't get to make me feel small. You don't get any part of me ever again." Marcus made a disgusted sound and stormed back to his horse. His two companions, men he'd probably hired for the journey, Evelyn realized, not friends who knew the truth about him, following hastily. They mounted up and rode off without looking back, disappearing into the melting snow and gray landscape like a bad dream fading in morning light. As soon as they were out of sight, Evelyn's knees gave out. Only Caleb's quick reflexes kept her from hitting the porch steps, catching her and pulling her firmly against his chest. She could hear his heart hammering beneath her ear, could feel the tension thrumming through his body. "You're safe," he murmured into her hair, his arms tight around her. "He's gone, and I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, he won't be back. I'll make sure of it. I'll write to a lawyer in Denver, get formal documentation of the marriage. I'll have Samuel write up a medical report about your injuries. I'll build a legal wall so high that your uncle will never be able to touch you again." "I stood up to him," Evelyn said wonderingly, her voice muffled against Caleb's shirt. Her whole body was shaking with reaction, not fear exactly, but the aftermath of adrenaline and emotion. "I actually stood up to him. I didn't cower. I didn't apologize. I told him the truth." "You were magnificent," Caleb said with fierce pride, pulling back just enough to look at her face. "So strong and brave. You looked him in the eye and refused to let him diminish you. I'm so proud of you, Evelyn. So incredibly proud. Miguel approached carefully, his weathered face creased with concern. You want me to follow them, boss? Make sure they actually leave the area? Caleb considered this, then nodded. Take Chenwei with you. Trail them until they're well clear of the county line. Make sure they get the message that they're not welcome back. Don't engage unless they turn around, but let them know they're being watched. Consider it done, Miguel said, already moving toward the horses. That evening, after the ranch had settled into its normal rhythms and the hands had been fed and the animals tended, Caleb found Evelyn in their bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing the dress she'd worn during the confrontation, staring at nothing. Hey, he said softly, kneeling in front of her. Talk to me. What's going on in that head of yours? Evelyn focused on him with effort, her eyes still distant with shock. I keep thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't been here. If I'd still been alone when he found me. He would have taken me back, Caleb, and I would have let him because I wouldn't have had the strength to fight. But you're not alone, Caleb said firmly, taking her hands in his. You have me. You have this ranch, this community. You have a whole life that's yours that he can't touch. And you did have the strength to fight. I saw it today. That strength was always in you, Evelyn. I just gave you a safe place to let it grow. That night, in the safety of their bedroom, with the door locked and Caleb's arms around her, Evelyn allowed herself to cry, not from fear or pain, but from relief. The confrontation with Marcus had been the final test, the last demon to face. And she'd faced it not as a victim, but as a woman who knew her own worth, who had people standing with her, who had built a life worth defending. What if he does try to contest the marriage? She asked Caleb, as they lay together in the darkness, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. What if he finds a lawyer willing to take the case? Then we'll fight him, Caleb said with absolute certainty. We'll get a lawyer of our own, a good one from Denver, or even San Francisco if we have to. We'll present evidence of his abuse and mismanagement of your estate. We'll have Samuel testify about your injuries. We'll have Sarah and Maria testify about the state you were in when you first arrived. We'll win, Evelyn, because we have the truth on our side, and we have each other. And more than that, we have a community behind us. You're not some isolated woman anymore. You're Mrs. Caleb Turner, respected member of Redemption Creek Society. That means something. We have each other, she repeated softly, and the words felt like an incantation against the darkness, a promise and a benediction all at once. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived in mid-March, it was glorious. The snow melted to reveal brown earth that would soon turn green with new grass. The cattle that had survived the harsh winter grew fat on spring pasture. Wildflowers began to dot the prairie in explosions of color, purple lupine, yellow buttercups, red Indian paintbrush. And in the garden, behind the ranch house, Evelyn planted seeds that would grow into vegetables to sustain them through another year. She was in the garden one warm afternoon in early May, her hands deep in the rich soil, when Maria came to find her. The older woman's face was wreathed in a knowing smile that made Evelyn instantly suspicious. How are you feeling? Maria asked, settling herself on the garden bench with a small grunt of effort. Fine, Evelyn said, confused by the seemingly random question. Why do you ask? Is something wrong? Wrong? No, nothing wrong. But Maria's smile grew even wider, more knowing. I have birthed 3 babies myself, helped deliver maybe 20 more over the years. I know the signs when I see them. Evelyn's hands stilled on the tomato seedlings she'd been planting, her mind suddenly racing. She thought about the exhaustion she'd been feeling lately, the way she couldn't seem to get enough sleep no matter how early she went to bed. The queasiness that had plagued her for the past 2 weeks, especially in the mornings. The tenderness in her breasts that made even her softest chemise uncomfortable. The way certain smells, coffee especially, which she'd always loved, now made her stomach turn. She'd attributed it all to the hard work of spring cleaning and garden preparation, to the stress of the confrontation with her uncle still working its way through her system. But now, with Maria watching her with that knowing expression, the pieces fell into place. I think I might be, Evelyn admitted softly, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat stomach. I haven't told Caleb yet. I wasn't sure. Didn't want to say anything until I knew for certain. Oh, you are certain, Maria said with absolute confidence. I can see it in your face, in the way you move. You have that glow, that look, and you keep touching your stomach without realizing it, the way all women do when they're carrying new life. Evelyn sat back on her heels, her mind whirling. A baby. She was going to have a baby. Caleb's baby. Their baby. The thought filled her with equal parts joy and terror. "What if I'm not ready?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "What if I'm not a good mother? What if I'm too damaged, too broken from everything that happened?" Maria moved from the bench to kneel beside Evelyn in the dirt, her capable hands grasping Evelyn's shoulders firmly. "Listen to me, mija. You are not broken. You are strong. You survived things that would have destroyed weaker women, and you came out the other side still capable of love and trust. That strength will make you a wonderful mother." "But what if—" "No what ifs," Maria interrupted gently but firmly. "You will make mistakes. Yes, all parents do. But you will love this child with all your heart, and you will have Caleb beside you every step of the way. That man, he will be a wonderful father. He has always wanted children, but would not bring them into a loveless marriage. Now with you, he can have the family he has dreamed of." That evening, as she and Caleb sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink and deep purple, Evelyn took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "I think there's going to be 3 of us by late autumn or early winter," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. Caleb went completely still, his hand spread across her stomach as if he could feel the tiny life growing there. When he finally turned to look at her, his eyes were swimming with tears he didn't try to hide. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Not completely certain yet, but Maria seems to think so, and she's birthed enough babies and helped deliver enough more to know the signs. And when I really think about it, all the symptoms are there." He pulled her into his arms so quickly and tightly that she gasped, then immediately loosened his grip, worried he'd hurt her. "A baby. We're going to have a baby. Evelyn, His voice broke with the weight of emotion he couldn't contain. "I know," she said, smiling through her own tears. "I feel the same way, terrified and thrilled and amazed all at once." They held each other as the sun sank below the mountains, both of them processing the magnitude of this new development. They were going to be parents. They were going to bring a new life into the world, a child created from their love and commitment to each other. The pregnancy was confirmed a week later when Sarah came to examine her, her capable hands gentle as she palpated Evelyn's abdomen and asked careful questions about her symptoms. "Definitely with child," Sarah said with a warm smile, sitting back and wiping her hands on a clean towel. "I'd estimate you're about 6 or 7 weeks along, which means you should deliver sometime in late November or early December, right when winter sets in properly. We'll need to make sure you're well prepared for a winter lying in, that we have everything ready well in advance in case the baby comes early or in case winter storms make it difficult to get help to you." The months that followed were filled with preparation and wonder. Caleb built a cradle in the evenings, his hands careful and precise as he shaped wood into something that would hold their precious child. He sanded every surface until it was smooth as silk, wanting to ensure there were no rough edges or splinters that could harm delicate baby skin. He carved small details into the headboard, a sun, a moon, stars, his love evident in every careful stroke. Evelyn sewed tiny gowns and blankets with fabric ordered from the catalog, her heart full of wonder each time she held up the impossibly small garments. How could a person be this tiny? How would she know what to do with something so fragile and precious? Maria shared wisdom passed down from generations of mothers, teaching Evelyn what to expect during childbirth and afterward. She didn't sugarcoat the pain or the difficulty, but she also spoke of the joy, the overwhelming love that would make all the suffering worthwhile. Sarah gave her more clinical information, what was normal during pregnancy and what symptoms should cause concern, how to prepare for the birth itself, what to expect in the days and weeks afterward. Between the two women's guidance, Evelyn felt as prepared as any first-time mother could be. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Evelyn suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, unable to keep down anything but dry toast and weak tea. Caleb stayed with her through the worst of it, holding her hair back when she was ill, bringing her cool cloths for her forehead. never complaining about the interrupted sleep or the extra work he had to take on as she struggled through the difficult first trimester. As she grew larger, new discomforts appeared. Her back ached constantly despite the special pillow Caleb made for her. Her ankles swelled in the summer heat until she could barely get her shoes on. The baby's movements, wonderful at first, became uncomfortable as the child grew and space in her womb became cramped. But through it all, Caleb was endlessly patient and supportive. He adjusted her workload to accommodate her changing body, taking over the tasks that had become too difficult. He rubbed her feet when they ached and her back when she couldn't get comfortable. He talked to her growing belly, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the mountains and all the things they would do together. "You don't have to fuss over me constantly," Evelyn protested one evening in late October as he helped her into bed for the third time, having rebuilt her nest of pillows to better support her enormous belly. "I want to fuss over you," Caleb replied, settling beside her and placing his hand on her stomach where he could feel the baby's movements. "You're carrying our child, building a person from scratch inside you. You're creating life, Evelyn. That's miraculous. That's the most important work in the world. The least I can do is make sure you're as comfortable as possible." Their daughter was born on a snowy December night, arriving 3 weeks earlier than Sarah had predicted, with a lusty cry that announced her displeasure at leaving her warm sanctuary for the cold world outside. The labor was long and difficult, nearly 20 hours from the first pains to the final push, and there were moments when Evelyn was certain she couldn't do it, that it was too much, that she wasn't strong enough. But Sarah and Maria coached her through it with patient firmness, and Caleb stayed by her side the entire time despite the tradition of men leaving the birthing room. He held her hand and wiped her forehead and told her she could do it. She was the strongest person he knew, just a little more. And finally, after what felt like an eternity of pain and effort, she heard the baby's first cry and felt the weight of her daughter placed on her chest. "She's perfect," Evelyn breathed, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the tiny red-faced creature who'd just entered the world. "Caleb, look at her. She's perfect." "You're both perfect," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at his wife and daughter with an expression of such complete love and awe that it made Evelyn cry harder. They named her Rose, after Evelyn's mother, who died too young to see her granddaughter. Rose Turner came into the world at 3 a.m. on December 7th, weighing just over 6 pounds, and possessing a remarkable set of lungs that she exercised frequently. The weeks after Rose's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, of learning how to care for this tiny person who depended on them completely. Caleb proved to be a devoted father, waking for night feedings to change Rose's diaper or walk with her when she was fussy, giving Evelyn precious moments of rest. "You're so good with her," Evelyn observed one night, watching as Caleb cradled their daughter against his broad chest, his large, work-roughened hands impossibly gentle as he supported her tiny head. "She's my daughter," Caleb said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. The years that followed were full of the ordinary magic that makes up family life. Rose grew into a bright, curious child who loved following her father around the ranch and helping her mother in the garden. She had Evelyn's blonde hair and Caleb's gray-blue eyes and a stubborn streak that came from both of them. When Rose was 3, a son arrived, James Caleb Turner, named for his grandfather. Where Rose had been loud and demanding from birth, James was placid and easy, content to watch the world with solemn eyes. The two children were different as night and day, but devoted to each other from the start. 2 years later came another daughter, Grace Elizabeth, who had her father's dark hair and her mother's smile. With 3 children running around, the ranch house that had once seemed too large and empty was now filled with noise and laughter and the controlled chaos of family life. The Turner Ranch prospered under their joint management. Evelyn's organizational skills and attention to detail complemented Caleb's ranching expertise and physical strength. Together, they built something that would last for generations. Not just a successful cattle operation, but a real home. A place where their children could grow up safe and loved, where the cycle of violence that had characterized Evelyn's early life was broken completely and permanently. Sometimes, in quiet moments when the children were finally asleep and she and Caleb sat together on the porch watching the stars, Evelyn would look at her life and marvel at how far she'd come from that desperate girl stepping off the stagecoach all those years ago. The bruises had long since faded, leaving no physical mark whatsoever. The emotional scars had healed too, though they'd left her stronger rather than broken, forged in fire into something more resilient than she'd ever imagined she could be. One autumn evening, when Rose was 7 and already talking about wanting to learn to rope cattle, when James was 4 and following his father everywhere, when baby Grace was just learning to walk, Caleb took Evelyn's hand as they sat together watching their children play in the yard. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Answering that advertisement? Marrying a stranger and moving 2,000 miles from everything you knew?" Evelyn thought about the question seriously, giving it the consideration it deserved. She thought about the fear and pain of those early days, the uncertainty and slow building of trust. She thought about the nights she'd lain awake wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. She thought about the life she'd left behind, the violence and shame and desperate survival that had characterized her existence with Marcus. Then she looked at her husband, at their children, at the home they'd built together through patience and love and mutual respect and hard work. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This life, our life, is everything I never dared to hope for. You saved me, Caleb, not just from my uncle, but from a future where I would never have known what real love feels like, what safety means, what it's like to build something meaningful with another person." "We saved each other," Caleb corrected gently, raising her hand to his lips to press a kiss to her knuckles. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions of life without really living. You taught me what it means to share your life with another person, to build something bigger than yourself. You gave me a family, a real home. You made me whole." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink and purple, their children's laughter rang out across the ranch. Rose was teaching James how to throw a rope, her movements patient as she demonstrated the technique their father had taught her. Grace toddled after them on unsteady legs, determined to keep up with her older siblings despite frequent tumbles into the grass. It was a scene of such complete domestic happiness, such perfect ordinary magic, that Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude for this life she'd been given, for this second chance at happiness. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, noticing her emotion as he always did. "I'm thinking about that scared girl who stepped off the stagecoach all those years ago," Evelyn said softly, leaning into his solid warmth. "About how she had bruises under her dress, and terror in her heart, and no reason to believe that life could ever be anything other than endurance and survival. About how a cowboy saw those bruises and asked, 'Who hurt you?' instead of turning away or taking advantage. About how that simple question, asked with genuine concern instead of judgment, changed everything." She turned to face her husband fully, this man who had given her safety and patience and finally, completely, love. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the greatest courage isn't in grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but in giving someone time to heal, in keeping promises even when it's hard and the rewards seem distant, in choosing kindness over convenience, patience over instant gratification, in building trust brick by brick until it's strong enough to support a whole life." Caleb pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, watching their children play as twilight deepened around them and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The mail-order bride and the cowboy had built something extraordinary from unpromising beginnings, a marriage based not on desperation or convenience, but on mutual respect, patient love, and the courage to heal. The bruises had faded completely, leaving not even the faintest shadow. The fear had transformed into strength and confidence. And what remained was a family, a home, and a love that would endure through whatever challenges the frontier and life itself threw at them. In the distance, a coyote called its wild song to the rising moon, and this time, when Evelyn heard the sound, she didn't feel afraid or unsettled. She felt at peace, completely and utterly at peace. She was exactly where she belonged, not because she'd had no other choice, not because she'd been trapped or forced, but because she'd chosen it freely. Chosen him. Chosen this life of honest work and simple joys and love freely given and received. And that choice, made from a position of strength rather than desperation, made from knowledge rather than ignorance, made from love rather than fear, that choice had made all the difference.